podcast app, you'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Talking twins and hierarchy. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Relentless focus on their bodies. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. What do they mean by all American? Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. No sex, just titillation.
Oh no. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
Oh no. This can't be how we start.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. And that's how I'd like to begin today's recording, Rebecca.
Wait. I fully was assumed that was sound check, so I wasn't listening. We usually start by just saying, sort of reading. We'll just pick nonsense to read for the purposes of sound check. It's usually from Sweet Valley High, but I assume this was just whatever you had in front of you. So I was just definitely waiting for you to be done, so
Always.
I could take. I thought we start with our sound check. You want to do that again?
I definitely don't want to read the opening paragraph of A Tale of Two Cities again.
Okay. Please go ahead as you were.
Oh, so listeners, I was just reading the some call it the most famous opening lines in all of literature. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That has to compete, of course, with the other incredibly famous opening line from literature. I'll just die if I can't go, which is the opening line of Too Good to Be True. But I bring this up because today's book, Too Good to Be True, is, in many ways, a tale of two cities.
Robert.
Rebecca Pardo.
I have to just be transparent, which is to say, I'm in a silly mood.
Okay.
And I'm having a bit of a laughing fit. And I may be just sort of laughing for a few minutes. I may not be able to stop.
Okay.
It was sort of caused by that whole way that we started. This book is so freaking rich. There are so many angles to dive into. There is so much here. I would love to talk about Tale of Two Cities. I assume you're talking about
You assume correctly, my friend.
Sweet Valley in New York City.
Yeah, those two cities. Shall we to the cliffhanger?
All right, yeah. Cliffhanger.
When visiting hours ended that night and Annie Whitman was well on her way to recovery, Jessica and Elizabeth hurried to the hospital parking lot and climbed into the little red Fiat. Come on, Jessica ordered her sister. Let's get this heat moving. This is D-Day. I know it is. Just don't be in too much of a hurry. We don't want Decision Day to turn into Disaster Day. Elizabeth started the little convertible and headed out of the hospital onto Walton Boulevard, whipping around for home. Well, who's going to New York and who's going to stay here and show Suzanne Devlin around? You tell me, Elizabeth said. I wish I knew. Let's get home so we can both find out. Elizabeth, with uncharacteristic impatience, pushed her foot down hard on the accelerator, and the red Fiat Spider zoomed towards the Wakefield's house. 2 weeks in New York City for one twin, and 2 weeks showing off the fabulous and glamorous Suzanne Devlin of New York, Paris, and London. Both girls were filled with anticipation as they pulled into the driveway, jumped out of the car, and raced toward the house. Both twins get more than they bargained for in Sweet Valley High number 11. Too good to be true.
Leaving on that note, how were you sort of feeling going into this? And what were you maybe? Or just what stood out for you?
I mean, this plot, the cliffhanger sucks. It's like At no point did I think sweet little Elizabeth was going to New York City. Like, pshaw. We knew Jessica was going from the end of that last cliffhanger. So I was expecting Elizabeth to be at home with Suzanne. I was expecting Suzanne to be too good to be true. I was expecting Jessica's visions of New York to be too good to be true. And I basically got what I wanted. Shall we to the plot summary?
The twins' dad, Ned, his old college roommate, who is an international diplomat based in New York, is sending his daughter Suzanne to come live with the Wakefields for 2 weeks in exchange for Jessica's going to New York for 2 weeks.
Suzanne shows up and is so gorgeous and so sweet and so nice, and all of the boys are falling all over her, but she seems only to have eyes for Oracle advisor and high school educator, Mr. Collins.
And this is interesting because something's coming up in the plot summary, which is, I thought you were going to say she only has eyes for Elizabeth.
That's not plot summary.
No, I don't mean in a sexy way or a subtext way. I mean just in the way that she seems extremely warm and genuinely focused on, like, it's not like she's so with the boys. She's really putting a lot of attention to Elizabeth.
That's true. Sorry, yes, that's true.
And I think we're going to need a couple more sentences.
Yeah, because we have only done the first chapter.
Suzanne accuses Mr. Roger Collins of assault.
Meanwhile, in New York, Jessica actually gets assaulted by Suzanne's boyfriend, Pete.
Yeah, so basically New York does not go as Jessica expected. As you can imagine, she had a glamorous fantasy of what it would entail. She gets independence she imagined and more, sophistication she imagined and more. You may say she played with fire, and she certainly does once again get burned.
Was that your sentence? That was my sentence.
Okay. Anyhow, basically Elizabeth ends up figuring out that Suzanne is indeed not what she seems. She is indeed too good to be true, and beneath the veneer of perfection lies something very, very dark. And the concern is Collins, it seems like Collins is going to be fired, his reputation ruined, taken away from being able to be a teacher, so on and so forth. Luckily, Elizabeth, with the help of Winston, is able to sort of break through Suzanne's veneer in a very public way, trigger her into doing a sort of, it's almost kind of cinematically kind of letting her rage in her monster show, sort of in an Ursula kind of manner. And in the end, that kind of solves it. Jessica comes home and we wipe our hands.
Perfect. Show me that couvert.
My favorite part.
Hit me with your cover. Bump, bump, bump. You better hit me with that cover. Bump, bump, bump.
I look forward to this all week. This moment we're about to have. Well, just the time I get to spend with you now, but
of course.
And then within that, the cover.
Oh, wow. Okay. This is not what I was expecting the cover to be. So on the cover, we have two young women. We have beautiful Elizabeth Wakefield, who is giving a very confused and askance look, very suspicious, very crabby look.
Sorry, I just need to make fun of very askance.
There's another woman on the front who clearly is supposed to be Suzanne. Call her Suzy, all her friends do, except her boyfriend, who just calls her Devlin, who is looking in the mirror and kind of touching her face, her temple, in kind of a dramatic way. You know how sometimes models are like having a very glamorous headache, as RuPaul says? This is her having a very glamorous headache. What is surprising to me is that Suzy is billed as being like so impossibly beautiful that she could be a model. And the young woman portrayed on the cover is like fine. I was expecting her to be much more clearly gorgeous.
Okay, that's your main takeaway. It's like she's not hot enough.
Yeah, that is my main takeaway is this 16-year-old girl isn't hot enough for me.
Well, you're really part of the problem, aren't you?
I mean, do you think she's hot
enough? Yeah, to me, she looks almost identical to Nancy Kerrigan. Look at the face.
She is giving Nancy Kerrigan, and I love Massachusetts' own Nancy Kerrigan.
That's who she looks like, and I do think she's quite beautiful. But that wasn't. I mean, did she knock me off my socks? No.
No. She kept you on your socks.
I don't know that I've ever. I mean, I don't know that these covers are really where I'm going for that, but.
Yeah. So basically, she is doing kind of the classic Jessica looking in the mirror. The Jessica is constantly like, "Look at me, looking in the mirror." Only it's Elizabeth looking at Suzy looking in the mirror, not Elizabeth looking at Jess looking in the mirror.
For me, I looked at it and my first thought, like before Nancy Kerrigan, was always Maleficent. Right?
Yeah. Sexy evil. I will say there's not that much to analyze about the cover.
Okay, I think I have a couple more things.
Great.
First of all, just the cowl neck. We haven't seen a cowl neck.
Is it cowl or turtle?
Oh, it's cowl. I mean, I think
It's not read.
I think
Right.
cowl turtle is sort of a spectrum versus a binary.
Great.
And like at some point when a turtle is loose enough and is sort of gathered with a sort of voluminous kind of nature, I mean, at what point does it become cowl? I mean, we could do an episode on that alone.
Of course.
I'd love for you to just sort of take me at my word.
I will.
And Liz,
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw, I mean, Liz is wearing kind of a signature polo.
Yeah. And very clearly a lavaliere necklace.
Yeah, and that is a great segue into a secondary reading I have of the cover. And this is going to get into the title.
Please.
So the title is, of course, Too Good to Be True.
Of course.
The taglines are, you should guess them, because I bet you could. Do you want to?
All that glitters isn't gold or something.
Amazing, no.
Oh,
You want to give it 3 tries?
shit.
You don't have to.
I mean, I love guessing things. There's more than meets the eye.
Amazing, but no.
I wish it were Something's Rotten in the Town of Sweet Valley, but I don't think we're going to get that, are we?
Not here, at least.
What is it?
On the back is A Devil in Disguise.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. I like that.
And on the front is just, is Suzanne as perfect as she seems? Question mark.
No. Period.
All right, and here's my secondary reading.
Please.
And I feel strongly about this one.
Okay.
One of the interesting things about this book, often we talk about the pacing, the aboutness of it all. One of the things about this one is we understand pretty quickly that the answer to these questions is she's not as good as she seems, she's bad. Like pretty much the title has told us good to be true. A Devil in Disguise has kind of signaled that. On the back we have Elizabeth knows there's more to her than meets the eye. So I think we're set up, and Elizabeth's sort of look of consternation at her, I think, is also giving us reason to be concerned. And of course, we trust Elizabeth's, judgment and everything. And so I think from the perspective of, again, pacing, sort of suspense, there's sort of supposed tension of, this girl's come to town and she's too good to be true, but is she? Is at least for the reader answered on page 1 in terms of it's implied by the title, right? But in the course of the book, we don't get actual evidence. Like we don't actually see Suzanne, quote unquote, be bad, of like explicitly do a bad behavior or hear her like evil internal monologue until I believe the end of chapter 6. And so it would be, I think, worth asking, what are we trying to solve here? Or what is the question or concern here? Like, it doesn't seem like it's, is she bad? Because we kind of know that she is. In fact, I think what Elizabeth is worried about isn't that she's evil. It's that she's actually perfect. And so the ultimate sort of reveal of her monstrosity, I believe, gives Elizabeth a relief. Because we're always talking about the mirroring and the seeing ourselves through the other and everything else, and how do we, the standards and the expectations. Of course, Liz is always trying to be perfect. She's now encountered someone who is Jessica's best qualities and Elizabeth's best qualities, apparently. Like, she's the most glamorous, the most sexy, the most gorgeous, to where she gives Elizabeth body insecurity in comparison. And yet she appears to be the kindest, the most self-sacrificing, the most warm and giving to others, caring, sensitive, thoughtful, curious, intellectual. She's gone to Europe boarding schools. Like, she's all of it, right? And so that makes Elizabeth feel insecure. And so the question of, is she good to be true? Like, Elizabeth wants the answer to be she's bad. And so I think part of the reason, and what's supported by the fact that we don't actually see that she's bad until the end of chapter 6, is because the actual anxiety that's building is that she's good, that she actually is this good.
One thing that you raised that I really want to talk about is the pacing of this book. I think this book is exquisitely paced and this is trigger warnings galore. This book, content-wise, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about everything. I mean, it is woof. And it is so readable. It is so enjoyable. They do this. There's this great kind of dramatic irony where we know that she's that Suzy is evil, but Elizabeth doesn't. Is Elizabeth going to figure out that Suzy's evil? And we get to like watch it all kind of unravel. We know that Suzy's accusations against Roger Collins are fake, but other people don't. And we get to watch them grapple, and then we get to watch that unravel. This feels to me paced in a way that is more, it feels like they're hitting their stride.
Yeah, and I think like one of the other interesting things about this one is that like Jessica's experience in New York, most of her experiences are told to us not as they're happening, but afterwards as she's remembering them. So it's like a lot of these like traumatic experiences, but it like happened last night and it's sort of described like in this almost very like brief sort of, I don't want to say dreamlike, but like, and part of that potentially maybe feels like protective in the sense that like one of the traumatic, for example, things we see happen to her is that she blacks out from drinking too much and she ends up, someone sticks her in a cab and she ends up going home to this apartment where there's like no parents and all this stuff. And like, that's a pretty scary thing. But we're told about it when she's like safe in the apartment the next day. So it's like, I wonder if part of the way that that was handled is intentional to sort of give the reader the feeling of like at least comfort and safety and knowing that she's okay before we have to necessarily hear about these very, very troubling things.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I think the same is true about Suzy's allegations against Collins. Like at no point is there any question at all, did Roger Collins do this or act inappropriately in any, like it is established very clearly and unambiguously throughout the text that like, you don't need to be nervous that Collins is actually a perv. He is not a perv.
Yes.
And I think that also gave me a sense of security where I felt icky, obviously, like icky, ooh, the icky, certainly throughout the text. But it wasn't the same ickiness that I felt in previous books.
It still, though, was pretty upsetting and uncomfortable to read about, even though it was later on, we know she's okay, to hear about Pete, which is Suzanne's boyfriend in New York, who like assaults Jess. Just like read that happening and hear him say those words that was like similar to before of like, no one's going to believe you.
Yeah.
And all this type of thing. Like it's just like, it's like 11 books. She's been assaulted, what, 8, 9 times? Like this is like, and her parents have no clue. Like she comes home from this one, doesn't even tell Elizabeth. It's like, again, my heart breaks for her, but
yeah,
we'll get into it.
Should we dive in?
Yeah.
Okay. So we open chapter 1 from that cliffhanger. Who is going to go? Jessica says, I'll just die if I can't go. I've been absolutely aching to go to New York City, and this is probably the only chance I'll ever get. So Jessica is trying to convince Elizabeth that she should go. She's also trying to convince her parents that she should go. And this, I think, raises an interesting question that we don't have to explore too much, but I think what they're raising here is a question of fairness. What they ultimately decide to do is they flip a coin. Jessica calls tails and loses the coin flip, which means that Elizabeth gets to go. And then Jessica appeals to Elizabeth and says, please let me go. I want to go so badly. And then kind of relents and lets Jessica go.
And the question this presents, which is what you're getting at, is why? Why did we get this? Why couldn't it just have been, obviously Jessica's going to be the one to go to New York. Liz is going to stay here. Like, why do we need this whole thing of, oh, Liz wants to go in and they do this?
That is actually not my question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
My question that this raises is they decide that the coin flip is the fairest way to do it.
Hashtag dad logic, hashtag Ned logic.
Yeah, lawyer logic. They keep saying like it's a more, Elizabeth's one who suggests it. She suggests it as a more sensible approach. They talk all about how like Elizabeth is fairness personified, whereas Jessica is clever and devious. Their father is infuriatingly fair. And so we are being told that the fairest way to decide who gets to go is flipping a coin. And that for me raises like moral questions about like the division of resources and what is the fairest.
Let alone the symbolic violence therein. I mean, what are heads and tails if not, ghostly doubles of one another, if not, binary kind of opposites? And what is the sort of presence of the head? It must have a tail, and there is no room for ambiguity. Oh, absolutely brutal.
Okay.
How do you think they should have done it then?
Well, so I think what this raises is like, is it fairest to divide things up
by chance,
equally and by chance, or is it fairest to divide things up by impact and need? Jessica wants to go far, far, far more than Elizabeth does. It impacts Jessica way more than it impacts Elizabeth. And so I think actually fairest would be to determine who really wants it the most and let that person go.
Okay. Can I propose a reading?
Please.
I think that part of what's going on here is that Elizabeth doesn't want to go from the start.
Yeah.
So the reason she doesn't say, okay, Jessica, you can go, is because then she's sort of being like boring, old, predictable, safe Liz, who, you know, she's sort of trying to evolve a little bit and not be always what everyone expects. And she doesn't want to always give in to Jess and let Jess have what she wants and the whole thing. So she sort of like, I think she sort of wants to go. So she does this thing of like, okay, well, I'm not just going to give in to you. Let's flip a coin. Then unfortunately, she wins the coin toss. So she has to let Jessica convince her, you know, and then Jessica sort of uses this thing of like exploiting Elizabeth's kind of insecurity about Todd and sort of jealousy around Todd in order to suggest to Liz that she should stay home, and Liz is extremely receptive to that. And
I think you're definitely right. I think Elizabeth doesn't want to go. I think that can be seen by the fact that she rolls over basically immediately because she can't imagine someone else covering the school picnic in the eyes and ears column. So I just think this raises the question. It's just so stupid. Like, obviously she doesn't want to go.
Right. And it's like, she doesn't want to admit that it's because she's freaking out about Todd, I think. And also just like, whatever. She's a
I don't even think she's even really freaking out about Todd. I think she just like is scared of the new experience and the riskiness of it.
There's a lot of like Jessica's kind of fantasies about New York and conversations with Elizabeth about going to New York, and Elizabeth's kind of contrasting attitude, unfortunately, does have a lot of resonances with my favorite movie, Big Business.
Oh, that is unfortunate.
We don't need to talk about it now, but at some point.
Can we talk a little bit about A Tale of Two Cities? Have you, I don't mean this this is a non-judgmental question. I'm just trying to calibrate how much plot summary you'd want. Have you read A Tale of Two Cities?
No, I haven't. And actually in high school, half our English class, I think I remember read it, and the other half read Great Expectations, and I was in the Great Expectations class. So I actually never read it. So I actually don't even know what it even is.
Okay. So we're going to go very, 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 like, we're not even really going to get into it. But basically, A Tale of Two Cities, London and Paris. Here, we, of course, have two cities, Sweet Valley and New York City. A Tale of Two Cities has a lot. It's set at the French Revolution. There's a lot of plotting and scheming. There's a lot of spying and accusations and false accusations. There are two characters who look identical, and one character takes the other character's place.
I can't believe I haven't read this.
The opening lines that I like so beautifully quoted talk about kind of the extremes with which people are understanding the current times. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. And the idea that people can only understand things in the very, very extreme ways, which feels kind of like a Jessica and Elizabeth. This is the worst thing to ever happen. I'm having the best time of my life. New York is going to open all these doors for me. Like, so there's this kind of extremity there. And one of the things that we kind of see is, although the cities are very, very different, and on the face of it, what is happening is very, very different, there are still ghostly resonances and doublings happening in London and Paris. And I think so too do we see those kind of resonances with the similarities of what's happening in Sweet Valley and New York. The idea that there is a big party in both places. The idea that there is either an actual or an alleged sexual assault in both places.
And on page 6, Mr. Wakefield balanced the quarter on the back of his thumb. Anyone for heads? Tails, Jessica spoke out. Taking the different route had always been her trademark. And it sounds like Tale of Two Cities has some ghostly resonances with, of course, the road not taken. And here we go.
Here we go again.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Elizabeth, like, has a thought to herself because Lila's having this party. It says, the Fowlers, especially Lila, were snobs in her opinion, though for once they'd done the fair thing and invited the whole junior class instead of just a popular few. I'm like, when you're in high school, just because they're rich, are they supposed to invite the entire junior class every time she wants to hang out with friends? It's like, I don't think that's a fair expectation for Elizabeth to have of them. I think that's more like if you're in kindergarten, maybe elementary school type of thing. And Robert, you are an education expert. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Because I feel like she was just villainizing them unnecessarily there.
I think
I hate the Fowlers, and I'm not a Fowler apologist, okay?
Yes, I would say that to invite the entire junior class of Sweet Valley High to your birthday is absurd.
Okay. Then Liz, quote unquote, lets herself get talked out of going.
Yeah,
and
it's
of
just such
trading with
classic Liz.
And Jess says, isn't that the most generous thing you ever heard? Of course, now Liz gets to be generous. And then we get big business in chapter 2. And I need to just please read a couple of lines, okay? It just says, like, Liz, I actually wish you were coming. It's not going to be the same without you. Thanks, Jess, but actually it's better this way. You know, I've never been all that crazy about big city life. Well, I happen to adore big cities, she stated defensively. If you want to be stuck in this crummy little cow patch for the rest of your life, it's okay by me. But I intend to live it up while I'm still young enough to enjoy it. Big Apple, here I come.
Leave town? Go to New York City? It's a dangerous, dirty, low-down place. I know. Oh my God, what'll I wear? I gotta get my hair cut. Oh, this is just the sense of purpose I need. I gotta get me some of those press-on nails. Do those things stay up? I wouldn't want them flopping off in any of those fancy nightclubs.
And Elizabeth kind of consoles herself by saying, don't worry. I plan to have a few adventures of my own while you're away. You may have New York, but remember, I have Todd. Please, Elizabeth.
I roll.
I think Elizabeth even comes clean about the fact that she didn't want to go, because Jessica says, you're just jealous because you're not going. And Elizabeth thought for a moment and said, you know something? I'm really not. Otherwise, I never would have let you wrangle me into trading places. I may be nice, but not that nice. If I really wanted to go, nothing could have made me change my mind. And so I think she does demonstrate that, like, she even gets it. This isn't a trip for her.
And then she's like, I'd rather go in the Colorado River. And I don't need the glitter of New York. Oh God. Then the scene at the airport. I mean, the kind of introduction of Suzanne.
They drop off Jessica at the airport, and then they're waiting for Suzanne. And Alice has this little line that I can't believe your ears didn't prick up on about.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me look back at my notes.
I'm not sorry. I didn't mean to accuse you.
Oh, about the laundry? About Stephen's laundry?
It's not just about Stephen's laundry. Alice says, I'll bet she's used to living away from home. Ned, didn't you say she's gone to boarding schools most of her life? I suppose there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't see how I ever could have sent you kids away like that. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I think children belong at home until they're ready for college. Thanks, Supermom. Like, what are you doing that is so great that your kids are around? Your kids are going through literal hell, and you're busy just getting up at dawn to just maintain your body.
Wait, that's not what I thought you were saying. I thought you were saying that it actually was a dig at Stephen. They should be home until they go to college, not after. And then he's like, haha, yeah, but I'm still here with my dirty laundry. And she's like, no, I didn't mean that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I like that too.
Let's bring in Suzanne.
Abruptly, Elizabeth drew in her breath. Walking towards them was the most beautiful girl she'd ever seen. Suzanne? No, she couldn't be. This girl had to be a professional model, or an actress. She was tall and willowy, with black hair that tumbled in glossy waves past her shoulders. Her back was bare in a chic sundress she'd obviously worn in anticipation of good weather. Her features...
This is the best. This is the best line.
Her features couldn't have been more perfect if they'd been sculpted by Michelangelo. Elizabeth was most struck by her enormous, dark-fringed, violet blue eyes, which were now searching the crowd outside the gate. Is Michelangelo famous for sculpting really, really beautiful women? That was what got me. I was just like, oh, okay.
Elizabeth immediately feels threatened and destabilized just by Suzanne's physical appearance and kind of instant demeanor and charisma.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so she swoops in with a squeal of recognition. Elizabeth, she cried, I'd know you anywhere, though that picture your parents sent didn't do you justice. You're even prettier than I expected. Elizabeth could only stammer some unintelligible reply. Remember in book 1, when Mariana West told Elizabeth she was pretty and suddenly she was won over?
That was exactly what I was thinking when this happened. I love our resonances.
And we were so naive then. We thought, how out of character for Elizabeth.
I didn't think that because I didn't actually know her.
No, but now we know that this is how to get her.
And one thing I love about the introduction of Suzanne, and I don't know if it's just the resonances with kind of the skanky, disgusting villainess, the divorcee, Mariana West. But like, I feel like very immediately, also, I guess you're right. Like the title of the book is Too Good to Be True. We're immediately clued in as readers that this girl is fucked. Like immediately, Alice says, "Welcome to Sweet Valley, Suzanne. We're so delighted to have you." Suzanne broke into a dazzlingly brilliant white smile. "Oh, I've wanted to visit for ages." It's just like, you've wanted to visit Sweet Valley, which is, of course, a wonderful place, for ages. I just find that it's like she's laying it on so thick that I think readers are immediately cued in like, oh, something is up with this girl.
Yeah, it's like a combination of her over familiarity and over intimacy combined with her very surprising sophistication and comfort with adults for someone her age. And then, of course, the vaguely British accent.
Yeah.
Probably from living in Europe, Elizabeth thought, awestruck by Suzanne's sophistication. She didn't sound stuck up, though, the way Jessica had when she was playing the lead in My Fair Lady the year before and had gone around school talking in an English accent for weeks. Suzanne was obviously the genuine article.
Loved it.
She is not performing.
No.
She is different from Jessica.
Well, that is also something that I really want to talk about. The ways that we again get a character who is like Jessica on steroids, and we are forced to confront kind of, although of course Suzanne is villainous and disgusting and evil in a way that Jessica is not, it feels like she's Jessica amped up.
Yeah, I strongly feel, and I have some stuff on this, I feel that Suzanne is probably, diagnostically speaking, has antisocial personality disorder, formerly known as sociopathy.
Yeah.
I feel that, and of course, until children are 18, we call it a conduct disorder. That being said, more than 80% of the people with the antisocial personality disorder is already exhibiting those by the time they're already 16. And I think that we don't have to get into it, but according to Mayo Clinic, while inherited genes may make you vulnerable to develop this disorder, life situations, particularly abuse and neglect, may trigger it. And so there is this idea that with antisocial personality disorder, while nature's loading the gun, nurture's pulling the trigger. And I think we have some evidence in this book, first of all, like symptomatically speaking, like her behavior, her thoughts, and how she is, that gives evidence that she has this. And secondly, the small and big clues we have about her past and her potential like hereditary things also, I think, supports a potential diagnosis. And I'm not a doctor. I am a doctor. I am not a medical doctor.
But what's interesting is it's also Jessica. Like, if you give the basic facts of what Suzy does, if we look at what Jessica has been doing since book one, there are definitely ghostly resonances and overlaps in their behavior.
And there are some key differences.
And I'd love to explore those differences.
In the meantime, should we of go chronologically a little bit here?
Absolutely.
I mean, so then what happens next?
Suzanne and Elizabeth get back home and they go for a swim, which is noticeable just because Suzanne is an expert swimmer in really good shape. Even her boyfriend has a hard time keeping up with her, according to Elizabeth.
We also get a crazy line there in their bathing suits or whatever that Suzanne didn't have an ounce of fat anywhere, which is literally like the second line of book one. And then Liz is then feeling self-conscious about her body by looking at Suzanne.
So we get a little more backstory on Suzanne and the idea that she was sent away to boarding school at 9. She claims that her parents want to marry her.
Wait, did you say 9?
9.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
After their swim and their kind of backstory, one of the most important moments in the entire text, that night, they dinner out on the patio. Barbecued spare ribs, potato salad, and a lemon chiffon pie Elizabeth had made in their guest's honor. So, Pardo, if you could think through barbecued spare ribs, potato salad, and a lemon chiffon pie, fuck, marry, kill.
Can I just ask a question?
Always.
Is the potato salad, and I think I know the answer to this, can you tell me more? Like, is it more of a mayo forward potato salad? Is it more vinegary? Is it good? Am I going to like it? Like,
yeah, you're going to like it. Oh, you're going to like this potato salad.
Like, it's not just like some random thing. It's more like what would be my like it's a potato salad I would like. Like these are sort of the versions of it that I would like, not just like what the Wakefields had in 1983 that may or may not be gross.
There's not like marshmallows in it or something. I don't know. They're probably putting raisins in
No,
shit.
but like
you can.
That's risky in 1983. You know, potato salad. It's like I don't know.
No, I wouldn't be me.
In that podunk town called Sweet Valley, California.
That cow patch. So we're thinking it's like amazing barbecued spare ribs or vegetarian barbecued spare ribs for those of us who don't eat meat, potato salad, and a lemon chiffon pie.
Can I hear yours first? Because this is sort of confusing for me. I want to hear yours first. I
Yes.
mean, I know you're going to kill spare ribs because you don't eat meat, right?
Well,
or you're going to have a vegan version. That's not allowed. I don't think that's allowed. Sorry, that's not inclusive. It's allowed. It's allowed. That was not inclusive of me. You're right.
Well, it also it makes it way easier for me because then I automatically just kill the meat every time.
But okay, true. But the reason I do like having it is because then it would be so transgressive if you actually were like, oh my God, but I'll just fucking, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it makes it sort of raises the stakes if you actually ever do choose it. Because it's like having always the vegan option sort of means like you can never sort of like, decide to be great.
So I am going to kill the potato salad, fuck that lemon chiffon pie, and I'm going to marry vegan barbecued spare ribs.
I changed my mind. I don't think you can make it vegan. Because at that point, it's like, well, what is real? What is meaning? It's like, you know what I'm saying? Then when we had shrimp scampi, if I don't eat shrimp, suddenly, what am I? Just, it's a whole new dish. I'm making like salmon, like something. It's like, that's not what it would have been. I mean, it has to be in the realm of like what would be on the patio with the Wakefield. Like, otherwise, like, what are we doing here? We could just like go to the Food Network and see what they're cooking tonight and do it with that. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to have vegan ribs in 1983. I'm sorry, but they're not going to have that at their table. They're just not.
Okay, well, I mean, that changes everything. Are you ready for my new revised answer?
Yeah.
I'm marrying lemon chiffon pie. I'm fucking those spare ribs.
Ooh.
I'm killing that potato salad. And I'm going to feel naughty. I'm going to feel naughty about those spare ribs, but I'm going to do it. I'm bad.
But you see why that's fun?
Yeah, it's so fun. It was way more fun than marrying fucking vegan barbecue spare ribs. No thanks. Dr. Pardo, whenever you're ready.
I'm going to actually, this is weird, but I'm going to kill the ribs. I'm going to just fuck the potato salad, but it's not because I'm like, ooh, potato salad's so crazy. Let me just have it once. Like, I would also want that every day, but I would love probably the lemon chiffon cake if it's kind of what I imagine. So I would actually really want that every day.
Great. Susanna's going out of her way to be like exceptionally kind and sweet to everyone. She is doing the dishes. She is showing up early. She is helping in every possible way. And she has this perfect veneer of the ideal person. That veneer.
Yes, and sociopaths often quote love bomb.
Oh.
And like when she saw Liz, immediately gave her a hug. And they also do something called mirroring. So when Liz said, call me Liz, and Suzanne said, call me Suzy. And then did you notice later in the book, she starts talking like Liz when she says, oh, Todd, you're such a nut. That's a Liz thing to say.
OMG, so I did not notice that. Good on you, Dr. Pardo.
I have a whole page that's references only dedicated to support of her diagnosis.
Of course you do.
Sorry.
I do want to say that the veneer cracked only for a moment when Elizabeth says it must be hard being an only child. And Suzanne's expression darkened momentarily, but then she shrugged and gave Elizabeth one of her sparkly smiles. And we can see some of this kind of backstory, that she feels very alone and isolated and sad.
100%. So basically, they're at the beach. All the guys are fawning over Suzanne.
So we're at this beach party. Everyone's kind of having a fun time. We get notified that Mr. Collins had agreed to act as a chaperone and unofficial lifeguard. And early on in their interaction, Elizabeth noticed Suzanne following Collins's movement with her eyes. Well, why not? Roger Collins was without a doubt the best-looking teacher at Sweet Valley High. With his wind-blown strawberry blonde hair and crinkly blue eyes, he, of course, reminded Elizabeth a little of Robert Redford. Later, after everyone's done, people are swimming. And Suzanne is the first to hit the water. She goes out as far as she can, basically. Suddenly, Elizabeth noticed a tiny figure out in the middle of the lake who appeared to be floundering. Mr. Collins, I think Suzanne's in trouble. Mr. Collins took one look, and instantly he was in the water, thrashing his way towards her with powerful strokes. Elizabeth remembered him telling her once that he'd been a lifeguard in college. She'd watched with growing relief as he began maneuvering Suzanne towards the shore, one arm looped around her chest. The crowd broke into cheers when he finally scooped her out of the water and carried her up the beach. A very drenched-looking Suzanne clung to him, sobbing, I don't know what happened. I must have gone out too far. Oh, Mr. Collins, if it hadn't been for you, I might have drowned. Are you all right now? Well, sort of. I know this will probably sound silly, but I'd feel so much better if you could just sit with me for a few more minutes. I still feel kind of wobbly. Mr. Collins looked uncomfortable. If you're not feeling well, maybe someone should take you home. So we have this moment of rescue, and it is very transparent to the reader what's going on here, right?
Yes, Suzanne staged this event, and Collins seems to be aware of that. He looked uncomfortable, and he seems to have some sense that something in the milk ain't clean, as it were. Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
I just thought of this when you said, when it said he was a lifeguard in college. Where do you think he went to college? I mean, we get a little more insight into him and his sort of lifestyle when Suzanne's digging through his drawers later, or get that whole scene at his house. I don't know if they give you, we see more of his clothes, we learn a little more about him. I don't know. Do you have any sense of, he's an English teacher, he's young, he's in his early 20s, and in Sweet Valley in 1903. I don't know. Where do you think he went?
I mean, somewhere local to California, certainly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe he went to Berkeley.
Because he has liberal teaching methods,
right?
That later gets him in trouble, and we've got a lot of questions about that. But Berkeley would make sense.
Okay, let's peg him at
go with Berkeley.
Can I ask a question? Because later we get this explicitly spelled out. Here, what do you think he's wearing? Like, he's definitely wearing board shorts as a swimsuit. What's he wearing kind of across his chest, do you think? Because I don't think we're told.
All right, well, let's just think it through. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Okay, if he's a lifeguard,
yeah,
he should be wearing some sort of bathing suit on the bottom,
definitely, without question.
And on the top should be either nothing or something he can sort of whip off very quickly as he's kind of running.
Okay,
so something that doesn't sort of inhibit that.
Like maybe
and I don't know what
this.
I don't know what the kind of bylaws or sort of best practices are vis-a-vis lifeguard costume. Maybe he really shouldn't be wearing anything on top. I mean, later we know he's comfortable shirtless when he's gardening, when he's doing
let's save that moment.
When he's doing, what's his name? Axl Rose drag. Oh. He's literally like shirtless with a red bandana.
Yeah, that is actually Axl.
Okay.
But so here I think it would be really weird if he's hanging out just in a bathing suit, as in it. Like, I'm trying to think of myself, because like I was a young high
What are you
school
saying? He
English
asked
teacher.
for this?
No. I'm saying here, I think he's probably wearing a tank top.
Fine, yeah.
Even as this is happening, Elizabeth was left with a vague feeling of confusion. Something was wrong, and she tried hard to put her finger on what was bothering her. Then she thought about the other day when she and Suzanne had swum laps in the pool. Suzanne was such a strong swimmer. How had she come so near to drowning? She even says to Todd, it's funny how Mr. Collins was acting almost like he couldn't wait to get away afterward. Like, she is picking up kind of on what's going on, but she doesn't want to face it. So instead she pushes the incident to the back of her mind.
Is the primary, I think, reading. I do think there's a second reading that I'm just giving now where potentially the sort of thing that's nagging her that she never puts a finger on is something she still never puts a finger on in this book, which is Suzanne got to be physically close to Collins in a way that she can't. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's the sort of threatening of Suzanne, the feeling of threatening and insecurity, and why can't I have what she has, and she's perfect and she gets it all. Suzanne being potentially malintended or fake is an antidote to the fear of Suzanne's perfection, right? So I'm just saying, I think it encompasses both.
I think that's interesting. I love the way that you use the word primary as an insult. You're like, that's the primary reading. You say it like,
makes sense.
Like, maybe if you're a dipshit, you think about the primary reading.
Well, I just, whenever you want to join me in the realm of analysis,
I'll get there eventually.
Then we get Jessica is introduced to Pete, who was the boyfriend of Suzanne. Okay. She's in New York. Basically, it's a very familiar pattern. She fakes liking classical music to try to impress him. She, wants to be liked by him. He sort of is like seeming not interested and also kind of negging her. And there's that sort of dynamic where the more he doesn't give her attention, the more she gets frustrated and is trying to get his affection.
What's interesting is that the chapter previous ends with Elizabeth saying, well, we can be sure of one thing at least, wherever she's getting herself into, Jessica's probably having the time of her life. And then the next chapter opens, Jessica felt as if she'd been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. And my primary reading skills, I was like, oh my God, what happened to Jessica? Is she okay? And I love the juxtaposition of, you think it's something terrible, but what it is she's like devastated by Pete's sexiness. He has a
and he
deep,
does end
sexy
up
voice.
being something terrible.
Yeah. I like that's the juxtaposition that I think is really interesting that I really like.
Yeah, this one description of Mrs. Devlin, who has a skin-tight bun from which not a single stray strand dared to escape. When Mrs. Devlin hugged Jessica, Jessica's only impression was of a cool draft of perfumed air. Again, I think adding to the support that Suzanne may have not gotten the nurturance as a child that she needs.
Absolutely. Mrs. Devlin is also described as, and I quote, gloriously thin, which just made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, then we get a line later where Liz is like, Steven's like, you're so skinny, you're like a zipper. She's like, I wish.
Yeah.
Okay, then we get to the missing lavaliere. Okay, lavaliere goes missing. Okay, let's keep it moving. The lavaliere is missing, has sentimental value. Suzanne says, let me help you look for it. Da, 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 da.
The things that Suzanne helps with as like establishing how great she is.
Yeah.
She's offered to do the dishes and done the dishes many, many times.
Yeah.
Sunday morning, she got up early and surprised them all with an elegant breakfast of French toast made with grated lemon peel and sprinkled with powdered sugar. Sounds like a fuck to me. On Monday, she spent the day helping Stephen put a coat of varnish on an old canoe he was restoring out in the garage.
Because she's nothing, there's nothing she can't do. That's the fear for Elizabeth, right? That's the rising tension. It's not that she's bad. It's that she can do all this. It's that she can do the car. She can do the pancakes.
More than once, Mrs. Wakefield had teased Suzanne about wanting to adopt her. So I do buy your analysis of like Elizabeth being threatened by this. Interestingly, Suzanne keeps pushing and being like, let's look for the necklace. Let's look for the necklace, which is interesting because we know that Suzanne stole the necklace. But it's funny that she like gets off on the looking for and not finding.
Like, I think one of the things that I believe actually distinguishes Jessica and Suzanne is that like Jessica can be cruel, selfish, she can use people and so on. But I don't think that she shows like delight in other people's sort of suffering or like sadism the way that Suzanne does, because Suzanne seems to delight in things like that, like purely for its own sake. Like, for example, there's a line where she's like delighting in hurting Liz just because Liz trusts her. And the fact that Liz is naive and the fact that Liz believes her itself is what makes Suzanne want to make her suffer. And I read that that's a thing, that's a characteristic of antisocial personality disorder. It gave her such a feeling of power to control people without their even knowing they were being controlled. Okay, so far, that's Jessica sometimes has some of that. But this is a little bit more. Take that dopey Elizabeth, for instance. How could anyone be so naive? She'd probably spend the next 100 years crawling around on her hands and knees looking for that necklace without ever even suspecting that her dear sweet friend Suzy had taken it. They were all so gullible, the whole bunch of them. None of the Wakefields knew how she was really sneering at them behind their backs. Them and just everybody else in this hick town.
I think that's a good example, but I think it also puts in relief, like earlier Jessica calls it a cowpatch town and she's calling it a hick town. And so I do think we are meant to see Suzanne as kind of a perversion of Jessica.
100%. Another example of that is when she comes in the first, I don't know how many pages it describes, she has a dazzling smile. Dazzling is classically the Jessica word.
Suzanne hooked an arm through Elizabeth as they headed out the door. Still smiling, she reached into her shorts pocket with her other hand, fingering the gold necklace that lay coiled inside. A pretty little trinket, she thought with satisfaction. And I think that's a really clear example of kind of the sadism that is not exhibited in Jessica. I could see Jessica taking someone's necklace because she wanted it or she liked the necklace. But the idea that it is just a pretty little trinket to Suzanne and that the pain is what Suzanne is into, I feel like is a different level than Jessica.
And that's why I think they make a point of telling us that Suzanne knows it's not worth anything, because she asked Elizabeth, was it expensive? And Liz says, well, it's more sentimental value.
Yeah.
So she's really just wants to see Elizabeth suffer. I think that is a very powerful moment when she smiles and thinks about the trinket, because that is the first moment we have that's evidence that she's malevolent.
Yeah, incontrovertible.
All right, chapter 7, let us do a content warning before we even get into it. This is positively pornographic, adult.
We do get some background. So Elizabeth Todd and Suzanne need to drop by Mr. Collins' house to drop something off. We find out, I don't think we knew this, Mr. Collins is divorced with one child, Teddy.
We knew it from way early. They told us like the first introduction of him. Because I was like, why does Elizabeth know his whole backstory? He's divorced and then the whole thing, the kid's custody and da.
Yeah. I don't remember any of that. Weirdly, Suzanne says, oh, let me run in to Mr. Collins. I'll take that manila envelope in. And Elizabeth's just like, sure, okay. Even though that's like very, very, very weird.
And that's why Suzanne, being smart, put in all that effort to gain her trust and to love bomb her and to ask her all those. One of the things I read about sociopath is they love bomb and then they collect info right away. And it's literally when she's going home home with them from the airport, it's literally her being like, oh, Liz, we're best friends. And she asks her a million questions about the kids in Sweet Valley and like, da, da, da. It's like.
So Suzanne hops out of the car. No one answered when she knocked at the front door. She could hear water running. So she walked around to the back of the house. Mr. Collins was standing out on the lawn watering the shrubbery. Quietly, she crept up behind him, a low, mischievous laugh escaping her. Mr. Collins whipped about in surprise, nearly dropping the hose. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. He smiled back, but the smile didn't reach up to his blue eyes. Don't worry, I don't scare that easily. You just surprised me, that's all. I didn't hear you come up. Is there something I can do for you? She stared unwaveringly into his eyes, widening her own ever so slightly. It was a game she liked to play, but half of the fun was that most of the men she played it with didn't even know what was going on. They would start blushing and stammering, or they'd look down at their feet. It gave her such a feeling of power to control people without their even knowing they were being controlled. The trouble with Mr. Collins was that he didn't seem as eager to fall into her net as the others. He stared right back without blinking or shifting his gaze. For an uneasy moment, Suzanne wondered if he'd seen through her pretenses. On the other hand, maybe he just needed a little more persuasion. Teachers always put themselves up on pedestals that way, like they were better than everyone else. Oh, how she'd like to bring this teacher to his knees. Liz asked me to give you this, but I wanted to see you anyway. I want to tell you how grateful I am for the way you saved my life. I never did get a chance to thank you appropriately at the picnic. I really owe you a lot. Forget it. I can't think of anyone who wouldn't have done the same. He was wearing only a pair of white jogging shorts and a red bandana to keep his longish strawberry blonde hair out of his eyes.
This is insane.
Suzanne's gaze strayed down to his bare, muscular chest, which was deeply tanned and slick with perspiration. It's so hot, she exclaimed, wilting into a nearby chaise lounge. She propped her slender legs up to give him a better view. The tan she'd acquired.
What? View of what?
The tan she'd acquired the past few days was perfectly shown off by the skimpy yellow shorts she wore. Mind if I steal a quick drink from the house? Silently, he handed it to her. Suzanne laughed merrily as the cool water bubbled over her lips and nose. She let it dribble down her chin until the front of her thin t-shirt was soaked, making it cling to her very brief bikini top. Mr. Collins couldn't help but look. Suzanne smiled to herself in triumph as she noticed the color mounting in his cheeks. Thanks, she said, handing the hose back to him. She looked down with a tiny cry of chagrin. Oh, will you look at that? I'm all wet. Honestly, Mr. Collins, you must think I'm the klutziest girl in the whole world. He bent down to yank a weed from the grass. In a low voice, he muttered something that sounded like, I think you know exactly what you're doing. But she couldn't be sure she'd heard it right.
You know what this makes me think? We always talk about how the kids are doing drag. Suzanne, who has been totally neglected by her parents and over adultified and sophisticated by this weird group of friends, and they're all dating guys in their 20s, she's probably been exposed to porn.
Yeah.
And the drag that she's doing here is porn drag.
Yes.
And I think that's some of this sort of contrast and escalation. And I think that is giving us also a window into just some of the things going on in her childhood.
It's just so sad and gross. Then then Teddy, Collins' son, comes down. They have like a cute little interaction. She's clearly like laying it on thick, like she likes kids. And then Collins just dismisses her, and she's annoyed by that. She finally makes him blush, and she wears a smug expression. The invincible Mr. Collins wasn't so invincible after all. Then we get a phone call between Elizabeth and Jessica is trying to make it seem like she's having the best time ever. All of the people she's meeting are so sophisticated. There's Evelyn, who's our age, but dating a guy who's 25. The whole time, Elizabeth's kind of trying to be a voice of reason and saying like, oh, it seems kind of gross that girl is dating a 25-year-old. Sounds a little strange to me. We then flash back to Sweet Valley, and Todd has 2 tickets to a Lakers game at the last minute, but Elizabeth is supposed to babysit for Mr. Collins to spend some time with Teddy. Of course, Suzy volunteers to babysit instead and convinces Elizabeth, and Elizabeth says yes.
Which was totally irresponsible. And Liz is like, I should call. Whoa. When you babysit someone's child, that's a role that is taken very seriously by a parent. And like, to someone who is caring for their child needs to be vetted, needs to be someone you trust. And like, Elizabeth is someone he's had this trust with for years. To get this girl that, even if she was normal, like that he doesn't even know, without asking him to care for his child, absolutely not.
Well, yeah, I mean, she says, I'll call. I'm sure it's okay, but let me
right.
call
And then
Mr.
Suzanne
Collins
is like,
first.
Don't worry, I will. It doesn't matter. You don't, like, she shouldn't be the one even making that call, because what if he's uncomfortable? He's not going to be comfortable telling her on the phone about it. Like, it's just no. That's an absolute no-no. Plus, it's like, to bring in a stranger at the last minute, it's like, you should at least call him yourself. Like, I just think that was like disrespectful and irresponsible. It really bothered me. That's not being a good babysitter. Why are you so casual about this? You're an educator. We're talking about the care of children. You just leave them with a random stranger without telling the parent?
I'm trying to be empathetic to, like, it seems like you're being really critical of Elizabeth when it feels like, I don't know that she deserves as much criticism as you're giving her.
I give where it is. And it's not about, the bulk of the criticism of this book should go to Elizabeth. Absolutely not. But where it is where it is. And I'm not saying she's done a lot of things wrong here, but that was a mistake. And I hope she recognizes that. No, yeah, it was.
I'm agreeing with you.
Thank you.
So Suzanne shows up to Mr. Collins, says
purring like Jessica.
She says Liz couldn't make it. I hope you don't mind. He says she should have called to let me know, kind of echoing Pardo's concern about this bad babysitting behavior. She says, oh, she must have forgot. She was in a hurry. He says, that doesn't sound like Liz. She's usually so responsible. Suzanne smiled. I guess no one's perfect. She leans close and brushes up against him.
So basically, she makes Collins uncomfortable. He goes out. Then she stays home. And as soon as he leaves, she's very rude to Teddy and kind of just basically snoops around Collins's home for the rest of the evening.
Or she thinks to herself, she'd only taken this job in the first place to get close to Mr. Collins. Let Teddy take care of himself. Hadn't she taken care of herself during all those years of being shipped off to boarding schools? Oh, they pretended it was for her own good, but she'd known they were only trying to get rid of her. She'd never told anyone how much she hated it. And them. Someday she would show them, though. Someday all the creeps who smiled and pretended to be her friends would find out how she really felt about them. And I feel like this is kind of giving her villain origin story and giving us an insight into why she behaves the way she does. I think this is also important in differentiating her from Jessica, although she is very similar to Jessica in some behaviors and in some experiences. It's clear that we're meant to believe, or I think we're meant to believe, that like the loving family and friends of Jessica and the support that she receives from them is what prevents Jessica from kind of going off the deep end into this kind of behavior.
Yeah, this is her wound. She feels that her parents don't care about her, that she feels abandoned, and she feels like it seems she doesn't have a friend in the world. Jessica has problems, but like she has people. She has people that she trusts.
While she's alone, she snoops through Collins's dressers and stuff. And it's interesting because she talks about how earlier when she's snooped before, she found a plastic bag of pot in her cousin's jewelry box, and she used that to blackmail her cousin and make her cousin a slave. And then she's disappointed because she doesn't find anything in Collins's house. She'd been unable to even unearth a Playboy magazine. Which
reinforces the idea that she probably has been exposed to porn and that has been an input for her.
Absolutely. The idea that she's disappointed not to find porn as she snoops through his house feels very like telling and honestly sad. She pretends to be asleep. She undoes another button on her blouse. He wakes her up. And she just kind of, aren't you going to offer me something to drink? I wouldn't mind a glass of wine.
She grabs his hand and presses it on her chest to feel how fast it's beating. He says, you can't drink.
He keeps saying, like, stop it, stop it. And she says, I know it's bothering you. Why don't you relax? I'm a big girl. I'm not the type to kiss and tell. Oh, Roger. And then he, like, forces himself free of her and says, get your things. I'll wait for you in the car.
we start to see again a sort of shadow of her dark self. We see her eyes narrow to razor thin slits. You wanted to kiss me. And he tells her, you're playing a foolish game. She becomes enraged. Rage was boiling inside her, bubbling to the surface. He had some nerve to treat her this way. He'd pay for this. She'd make him pay. Okay, so remember how similar to how in book 1, we had the actual kind of attempted assault, which Jessica never was able to kind of give visibility or be seen for. And she also fabricated something about Todd. We talked about what might be going on there and how she's sort of projecting. She needs to be able to express what happened to her and stuff like that. And in this book, we have the assault of Jessica by Pete, like juxtaposed. It's like one's at the end of one paragraph. It's like they're very like next to each other, of like the assault that actually happens of Pete to Jessica, and then the like fabricating of what Suzanne says Collins did is like very similar. And I think Suzanne even uses some language of like, he said no one will believe me, or like something like this, or like there's some like parallel things there. I feel like when people talk about rape and like sexual violence, like one of the thing that freaks everyone out, that's like, how do we make sense of this, or how do we interpret this, is false accusation. Okay, we in the world of caring about sexual violence like to talk about believing people, and that when someone says this happened, you default to believe them, right? And that pretty much most of the time, overwhelmingly, because of the system, the culture, the everything that repunishes, pretty much there's almost never a reason to do a false accusation, okay? And overwhelmingly, we got the other side of the story, which is domestic violence and sexual violence and things being not reported, underreported, right? And so what do we do with this question of what happens when there is an actual false allegation? What does that do to our opinion or our worldview of people don't lie about this? Like victims, quote unquote, like this isn't something people make up, and like you should believe people. Like, so then what do we do when a Jessica or a Suzanne, we see they fully made it up? And I think one of the really astute ways to think about this is that it is the same rape culture that is cultivating all of these actions, because the fact that Jessica is seen as a quote unquote bad victim with Rick Andover because she went to a bar when she's underage, because she hung out with someone that is objectively everyone knows is a bad boy, because she did all these stigmatized things you victim blame for. So her experience of what happened to her cannot be validated, right? So there's something where like that same thing is also informing this thing she does with Todd. Not to say that that's necessarily what's going on with Suzanne, but I do think there's something where like one thing Elizabeth, I think, says to Suzanne is like, people will believe you. You're a good person. And it's so reinforcing this idea that like when sexual assault happens to a good person, like they didn't deserve it. And like you should believe them about stuff, right? And that's juxtaposed against Jessica, who's, you know, going out with the older kids and taking risks and drinking, and, you know, maybe she should have known better kind of thing. And so I guess I felt like maybe Suzanne has experienced this violence from her boyfriend or whatever, and like maybe that's also part of like, yeah, I don't know, the like accusing of it, and like part of what she's telling Liz, maybe similar to how Jessica did with Todd. It's like maybe some of what she's describing she has experienced.
I think the understanding that the same kind of rape culture and misogyny that goes into actual sexual assault also is part of like baked into the thinking of false accusations. Like, so the root cause is addressing rape culture and misogyny, and that will in some ways address both kind of prongs of that problem, I think makes a ton of sense. I think one of the things that's hard in this book, especially at this point in the series, is that like so far this is the only claim of sexual assault that ever reaches the point of really telling other people and turning into a real thing. It feels like the false accusations are getting so much more attention than the real events that are happening. And so we spend the rest of the book kind of unraveling Suzanne's accusation, which could lead some readers to be like, well, this is how you handle someone who accuses someone else of sexual assault. And like that for me is very scary and not good. And then literally on the next page, as you were pointing out, we get Jessica and Pete and their interactions, which are very clearly sexual assault. And that never gets discussed really beyond us hearing it here. And then we get a quick cut. Like, this is what's so interesting about this book, is it flash cuts from Suzy running away from Collins's house, ripping her own shirt, to Jessica and Pete attempting to assault her to Suzy coming into Liz and saying it's so terrible, no one's ever going to believe it. And then Elizabeth says, I'll believe you. Suzy says, Mr. Collins, he attacked me. He tried to. I mean, I can't say. And Elizabeth has this reaction like, oh, there's got to be some mistake. Mr. Collins would never do anything. She feels sick.
It feels like a nightmare.
She didn't want to believe it.
Liz says we have to tell someone. Suzanne says, what if they think it's all my fault? I led him on. Elizabeth says, how could they think anything so terrible about you? You're the sweetest person in the whole world. She's a good victim.
My parents know what you're like. Liz says things like she knew that as soon as this got out, it would cost Mr. Collins his job, maybe even ruin his life. A tiny nagging voice inside of her asked, what if this isn't true? My problem with this is that Elizabeth and then other people adopt the language that rape apologists use about rapists, where it's like, oh, this will ruin his whole life. Like, we can't punish him. And it's complicated because she's also, in this specific instance, right. And it feels a little gross that it's modeling like, well, actually, Elizabeth is right. And you should question victims and not believe them. And it's like, that's not the message I want people to get from this book. The news breaks through the school.
This line, the part Elizabeth hated the most was that so many people actually seemed glad about it. Mr. Collins had always been popular with the students, but some parents viewed his teaching methods as too liberal. Now they were happy to have a good excuse to get rid of him. What did you make of the parents think his methods are too liberal and people are actually happy about this?
And there's another moment, too, where Olivia worked in the paper, too, and was devoted to the handsome young faculty advisor. She shared his liberal views and hated injustice just as much as he did. Have we ever seen Collins's, like, liberal views or his hatred of injustice? Like, is he talking about racism and stuff? I've never heard him. I mean, I love that. I love his support as part of the coalition. I just haven't seen it.
I think what they mean by liberal views is he sits on a desk and runs his hand through his sandy hair and is like, call me Roger. I think that's what they mean.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something. Later in the series, when Elizabeth wants to write an article for the Oracle about sexual harassment and teachers sexually harassing students, Collins tells her no.
Oh, wow. Well, we can't talk about that now.
There's a party at Lila's, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And Elizabeth decides that a normal outfit to wear to a party, looking in the mirror, she decided she didn't look too bad. She was wearing her favorite velvet skirt and a high-necked lace Victorian blouse. Suzanne had helped her fix her hair in a fancy French braid, into which she tucked a sprig of fragrant honeysuckle.
The no for me. There's this moment where we get Suzanne's thoughts, and she goes, as far as Roger Collins went, well, he was only getting what he deserved. It would serve him right to get fired after the way he treated her. I showed him, she gloated to herself, no one can ignore Suzanne Devlin and get away with it. And this just has echoes of kind of Jessica and the way that she accused Todd, the way that she kind of ruined the lives of people who turned her down at a dance, etc.
And then Elizabeth, going into Suzanne's suitcase to pack a gift for her, finds, of course, her lavaliere. And how did it get there? It didn't make any sense at all. There had to be some other explanation, thought Elizabeth. A perfectly normal explanation. She'd ask Suzanne about it when she got to the party. What if Suzanne had meant to steal the necklace? What if... Okay, then she goes, puts it on and goes to Todd. She tells Todd, I found the lavaliere. She's not good. Then they...
So what's interesting about that is she tells Todd that she took the lavaliere, and she says, suppose Suzy did take my necklace. Would that mean she lied about Mr. Collins too? And this for me is kind of the shaky part of this text, because basically what it's saying is the second that Suzanne reveals herself to be anything less than the sweetest, most perfect victim, all of a sudden she's lying about her accusation. And I obviously know in the reality of the text, she is lying about her accusation, but I feel like this has ripple effects for like our larger culture in a way that I think is not great.
Here's the thing. I completely agree with you, but it's like, unfortunately, in this text, that is what happens. And so every time they reference, like, she might have lied about it, and is she lying about it? It's like, unfortunately, she is. And so we do have to, at some point, sort of accept that to sort of be able to kind of move through this.
That's true. Okay, sure.
But I completely agree with you that it would be really, really nice if 11 books in, we had some sort of recognition and taking seriously of the multiple actual assaults that are happening, rather than the emphasis on this false accusation.
Yeah. So Liz goes to visit Mr. Collins to ask him what's going on. So she just asks him, is it true? I mean, Collins doesn't say no. He says, what do you think? No friend of mine would have lied to me the way she did and stolen from me, not to mention what she's been doing to you. And to think I was actually sympathetic to her. Oh, Mr. Collins, I'm so sorry about everything. So then she confronts her. Once Elizabeth says, I don't think you know the first thing about friendship. Mr. Collins was right. You're the biggest loser of all. Suzanne's eyes narrowed murderously. The mention of that name instantly made her forget all of her pretenses. Mr. Collins, what did that lecherous creep tell you? That I was the one who tried to seduce him? Okay, so what if it's true? He wanted me as much as he wanted it as much as I did. He would have done something about it too if he weren't such a saint. I just like that's such a Murder, She Wrote TV moment where, like, in reality, this person who you have so skillfully diagnosed as a sociopath would just keep lying. They would not be like, oh, you found out that I took your lavaliere? I guess everything is crumbling around me and I'll just tell the truth about everything now. Like, that's just not how people work.
To quote you, of course, this was very convenient, very sort of easy. Elizabeth invokes Jessica to trigger her. It says, Mr. Collins was right about you. He knew from the beginning how evil you were. At the reminder of Collins, the corner of Suzanne's mouth turned up in a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer. But Elizabeth didn't miss it. A spark of hope flared inside her. Maybe I can crack her angelic veneer after all, she thought. No wonder he wouldn't look twice at you, she added for good measure, mimicking a tone she'd heard Jessica use on numerous occasions. Because she knows that there are these pieces of Suzanne that pieces of Jessica kind of are in dialogue with. I thought that was interesting. Then Winston accidentally on purpose spills something on her to crack the veneer even more, and then it's over and she has her Ursula moment. You idiot, look what you've done. You dumb clod, get off me, you're only making it worse. Can't you just leave me alone, you big stupid dog? Suddenly she realized everyone was staring. Abruptly she stopped screaming. Her sweet smiling mask shifted back into place. She even attempted a weak laugh as if the whole thing had been a joke. Basically, it's too late. Everyone is done with her. And then it essentially is wrapped up here. Oh, one crazy thing that happens. Did you clock the sandwich Winston eats?
No. Oh my gosh, tell me about the sandwich.
It's just, I said, what? Boy, Jessica is going to be mad when she hears about all the stuff she missed out on, Winston commented, cramming an entire chopped olive sandwich into his mouth at once.
No.
Have you ever heard
Winston.
of a chopped olive? Have you ever heard of a just olive sandwich?
No, I've heard everything. A chopped olive sandwich? No, thank you.
A chopped olive sandwich. Do you think it's just olive and bread?
I mean, maybe there's
on it? It would be so salty.
It's gonna be very salty, but the bread.
It's just like it's like top and odd, but like times 100. Okay.
Jessica comes back and says, "Home, sweet, boring home." She's happy to be back. She doesn't say anything about anything, and like she pretends that everything was fine with Pete, even though it wasn't.
So basically, we're wrapped up on Suzanne. Whatever. Jessica's home, and then throughout the book, the kind of C plot, just sort of speckled in here and there, has been that Stephen's been around and he's uncharacteristically mopey. He's mopey about Trisha. He's calling her. She's kind of seeming distant and we're not sure exactly what's going on.
Poor Stephen. Elizabeth wished there was some way she could comfort him, but the truth was she felt just as uncertain about Trisha's feelings as Stephen did at this moment. As much as Elizabeth liked Trisha, she couldn't help wondering if there was some truth in what Jessica was suggesting. Why else on earth would Trisha be acting so secretive?
Sorry, what was Jess suggesting? That she's cheating on him?
Yeah. On the other hand, her recent experience with Suzanne had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. It was best not to form judgments based on superficial evidence. You can't be sure of anything until you talk to Trisha, Elizabeth said gently. Stephen was close to tears. I've tried. But she says nothing is wrong, Liz. I know she's hiding something. I can see in her eyes and it's driving me crazy. What terrible secret is Trisha keeping from Stephen? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 12, When Love Dies. Wow.
Thoughts, feelings, predictions, hopes?
I mean, when I saw that the last one in my bundle of 12 was When Love Dies, I was like, oh God, are Todd and Elizabeth headed for disaster? But now that I know that it's just Trisha and Stephen, I could not care less. Like, cool. Break up, don't break up, couldn't care.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, we've only gotten them like peripherally. Yeah. I mean, she showed up for that dinner where they announced Mariana West promotion, and that we haven't really seen that was kind of it. And then her father was arrested for drunk driving or something, right? And that's it.
Famously, she's had some duck à l'orange. We know that about her.
All right, are we good?
I think we're good.
Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.